It was a striking headline in the New York Times. Obama allows Congress say on Iran accord. Excuse me. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, with every single Democrat joining the GOP, voted to ensure that Congress can review and act on any nuclear deal that the administration reaches with Tehran. The White House did get some language softened, but the network newscast blew off the story, and the limited coverage on the morning shows didn't treat it as all that controversial.
The White House says President Obama is ready to sign a compromise bill letting Congress vote on a final deal, nuclear deal with Iran.
A potential nuclear deal with Iran has resulted in a rare show of bipartisanship in Washington.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Rick Grinnell, Fox News contributor and former foreign policy spokesman for the Bush administration. And in New York, Julie Roginski, a Democratic strategist and also a Fox News contributor. Rick, how can this Senate committee vote, with all the Democrats defecting against Barack Obama, be treated as either a non-story or not a controversial story?
Look, the Iran issue is very complicated, and it's probably too complicated for most of the political reporters. I don't think that they're understanding all the implications. I mean, you just look at the news this week of Russian S-300 missiles being sold to Iran, the Yemen peace plan that Iran has now given to the UN, which is a joke. Even today, the Iranians are poking fun. All of these issues really directly relate to the Iranian deal, but the media are missing them because I think we have D.C. political reporters that are really reporting on this, and they don't understand the nuances.
Well, you also have New York executive producers making decisions about what to put on the air. So, Julie, this was a big confrontation between President Obama and Congress over what say Capitol Hill would have in any final deal. It was kind of diffused by a bipartisan compromise. Maybe the media are just bored by bipartisan compromise.
Well, obviously, as you just used this expression, leaving blood on the floor is much more interesting. What they missed, I think, is that there was blood left on the floor, and it was Barack Obama's. The president drastically opposed Congress having any say on this. It started with Senator Menendez, a Democrat, the former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who pushed for congressional authorization on the Democratic side. That mantle was picked up by Ben Cardin, who took over for him on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So Democrats really stood up to the president on this, and I think that's the story. And the less that's talked about in the media, the more people are missing the fact that this is actually pretty unprecedented during the 6 years of Barack Obama's tenure, which is people really on the Democratic side did stand up to this president and say to him that, no, Congress does want to say on something that he did not want Congress involved in.
So, if Julie Roginski, a Democratic strategist, says the president's blood, politically speaking, was left on the floor, how is this not a story at all for the network newscast? I mean, you say political reporters don't understand the nuances of it, but just in terms of the sheer politics of it, it seemed like pretty significant to me.
Yeah, and they actually got it wrong when you look at it, because they were saying that there was bipartisan support in Congress for the Iranian bill. Many of them were just really getting this confused. There was really bipartisan support to say we want to have a say, and actually our say is different than the president's say. Look, I have a difference of opinion because I think it's really dangerous to have the Congress trying to get involved in foreign policy. I'm against the Iran deal. I think they should do everything they can. But I actually support the executive branch's ability to put forward. They won the election. Elections have consequences. They should put forward foreign policy. However, Congress on the sanctions, Congress owns the sanctions policy. To permanently get rid of sanctions, that is Congress's business. I think that should have been their plan.
Just briefly, Julie, because I want to move on to our other topic. Does the press just not like or care about these sort of squishy congressional compromises? And of course, it has to go to the Senate floor and play itself out.
I think it's more than that. I think we've been talking about this Iran deal for so long now that people are confused, and Rick has a point as to what exactly happened. Look, the reality is we don't even have a deal. I mean, the deal may or may not happen at the end of June, but people act as though we already have a deal on the substance of the matter, and the reality is we don't. So I think part of it is confusion. I think part of it is exhaustion. I think part of it is as Rick pointed out, a misunderstanding of exactly what's going on and the nuances of it.
So the media have Iran fatigue. All right, let me play a little bit of the network coverage of the other big foreign policy issue this week involving President Obama and Cuba.
We are witnessing tonight another historic step in thawing relations between the U.S. and Cuba. The White House announcing that President Obama will remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism.
4 days after that historic handshake with Raul Castro, President Obama took another step today toward normalizing relations with Cuba.
So many in the media describing this step as historic, not controversial.
Yeah, and I think, look, the Europeans have never been the Europeans have been engaging with Cuba. They haven't been doing the blockade. So there is this huge nuance that the media are missing in terms of the United States is the only one that has been blocking Cuba and having this sanctions policy. If the engagement process hasn't worked before, why should it work now? There's a whole bunch of nuances that they should be reporting on, and that is controversial within the United States. That is a very big story. Let's hear from the Cubans. Let's hear from people who actually have been dealing with the negative parts of this policy.
But I wonder, Julie, with what's really going on is the media treat this as non-controversial, whether Cuba should or shouldn't be on the terror list, because the mainstream media have largely embraced President Obama's normalization of relations with the island.
Well, and it's not just mainstream media. It's pretty much the American public. I think if you look at poll after poll, it shows that most Americans are speaking of fatigued by our Cuba policy, and certainly don't put Cuba in the same category as you would Sudan or anybody else. And so, or for example, Syria or Iran, for that matter. So when you have the vast majority of voters saying enough is enough, right, and you have the vast majority of media probably agreeing with them and saying enough is enough. This has been going on, as Barack Obama said, since before he was born. It becomes a story that I think most people just want to move on from. Cuba has not been in the news for many years now.
Well, enough is enough for this segment, only because we're out of time. Julie Riggins again, Rick Grinnell, thanks for stopping by this Sunday.